Thank you, A Metal Penguin, for doing this week's animated intro. Your hard work is always appreciated, sir. And guys, big news. Guess who's guesting on this channel this week? Did you know gaming? The peanut butter to my jelly sandwich. They're going to be providing some additional information for some of the stuff that we find on this week's episode. And so with that said, why don't we take a look at what we found out of bounds? So the first thing I want to talk about is a test map that is still inside the game. Now there are a few things that you will not see in the main game, like for example this soccer ball here. But the star of the show on this map is that over to the right there is a trampoline stew, which you may not know what a trampoline stew is. Well, in the context of Boundary Break, all we have here is a giant oval-looking monster with an eye on the top of his head and a horn for a butt. And he shows up incredibly briefly during this scene. In fact, if you don't turn the camera fast enough, you may never see him at all. Spraying him with water will freeze him in place, and jumping on his eyeball will kill him and also give you 1 coin. But now I'm going to turn it over to Did You Know Gaming to give you a little more information on this creature.
Stompin' Stew, known as Hinokuri 2 in the game's files, is an unused enemy that could actually be seen in footage when the game was shown off at Nintendo's Space World event in 2001. Still within the game's data are 3 separate forms for Stew, which we'll call the Skull form, Head form, and Headless form. The Skull form has protective skull headwear that cracks as the player damages it. The Head form seems to be how the creature would naturally look, and the Headless form is the model without the mushroom-like coating on its torso. Stompin' Stew lives up to its fan-given name, stomping around while shaking the ground, spawning Strollin' Stews and eggs with goobles in them. Researchers at the cutting room floor have noted how the 2 in the creature's name likely indicates that there's 2 versions of the enemy. There's even references to both Hinokuri and Hinokuri 2 in the game, with the original Hinokuri being linked to a boss battle event. This could mean the original Stompin' Stew was a boss, or at least part of a boss battle.
Much appreciated, and now we're going to do a zoom out of the entire test map. So let's talk about how the flood works. Now that water effect in the game looks really nice, doesn't it? How do they pull that off, you might be wondering? Well, if you take the camera over on its side, it becomes painfully clear. The water effect for the flood is in fact a series of water bubbles. And those water bubbles just move really, really fast, so that from the perspective that you're always forced to look at, flood looks freaking awesome. But here, you can see that there's no 3D effects at play. It's just simply a bunch of 2D textures being thrown around to give you the visual illusion of streaming water. It's really fascinating. Speaking of which, have you ever armed yourself with a large water shooting apparatus and thought to yourself, man, it's great to have the power of Neptune at my fingertips, but I wish it wouldn't make my shoe so stinking damp? Well, I got a solution for you. It's called Vessi. Vessi has these stylish shoes that are waterproof, Bowser Jr. goop proof, as well as Human World snowproof and sandproof. But don't take my word for it. I'm gonna dip this shoe in my koi pond, and you're going to see right here and now that your foot will be as dry as a plush doll's bottom. So feel comfortable in a flood or make a splash by wearing Vessi shoes. You can use my code SHESAYS to get $25 off your first pair. That's vessi.com/SheSays. In lots of areas of Super Mario Sunshine, there's places that are barred off, and surprisingly, unlike most video games that you'll see covered on this show, taking the camera outside the boundaries is not that disappointing. Now, there isn't like a new town or anything quite like that, but there's low poly geometry for the other levels in the game just outside the boundaries here, and that's a little to be expected. If you get to certain heights in this level, you might be able to see that for yourself. But what's really cool here is if you take the camera and point it back at the stage that you're playing in and start to pan the camera out, it looks just the way it does when you look at it from other areas of the game. Then of course there's this area here where PD Piranha can show up later in this level, and unfortunately just around the bend there isn't too much to see. I guess taking the camera where it's not supposed to go will have varied results. And then sometimes going out of bounds will show you something that you're just simply not meant to see at all. Like in almost every single bonus stage, all the way in this position right here, you can almost certainly find these white squares. What purpose does it serve? Well, it remains to be seen, honestly. But almost consistently throughout the board, there are some exceptions, you will find this white square. And it's not double-sided, so if you were trying to look for it from where you're standing playing the game vanilla, you're not going to see it. You'd only be able to see it from down below, and unfortunately it's already past the death barrier. Then you want to talk about a really obscure thing that is inside the map that you can't really see that well. In episode 4 of Pinna Park, there is a set of bananas far, far in the sky. This set of bananas was discovered by a young man named GoGo, who in his discovery video would like the name of the bananas to go by GoGo Bananas. So from here on out, we're gonna call them the GoGo Bananas. And standing in this spot here, which you normally can't because there's a barrier between you and the park, if Mario were to keep rising in place at this spot, you would eventually bump into the bananas. Now the bananas behave in a way just like any other fruit that hangs from a tree. It's placed in a very specific spot, and then if Mario interacts with it with a water hose or whatever else that allows them to be knocked off the tree, the bananas will then fall. What they're doing up here, we're never gonna know, but it is one of the most bizarre little facts that I have the deepest thanks for GoGo for finding. Now, through deductive reasoning, I found out something pretty cool. See, Mario walks inside this shop, and then if you have the camera panned out, you can see a lot of Delfino Plaza's items far down below, but the plaza itself is missing. But I was able to extrapolate exactly where this was in conjunction with the island itself, and decided to try to take Mario in that exact point, but outside the shop itself. And I gotta say, I was really happy with the results, because taking Mario all the way up here is gonna show you that he can suddenly stand in place in the middle of nowhere. But even better than that, this proves that this is where the shop is, because if you look at who now shows up whenever Mario stands in this spot, you can see the same shopkeepers that were inside of that shop itself. And the same can be said for the other indoor areas as well. It's almost always directly above wherever you enter the door. Great example of this is the box busting minigame, and why it's such a great example is because once you get up here, you can see all the boxes, including the guy that runs the minigame. And that's not even the best of what you can find out of bounds, honestly. One of the most bizarre discoveries was in Pinna Park, and once again on a very specific episode, if you take the camera down below in this very spot near the carousel, you'll find this unique cardboard character named Cug. Looks just like a Goomba here, and turning the camera around on this thing will show you that it has a backside as well, which is super odd. Normally anything like this wouldn't have a backside, but Cug has some special care and attention. What he's doing here, once again, that can't be really explained, but I will turn it over to Digino Gaming to tell you everything that we know so far.
This character is named Cug after the title of the files associated with it. The name Cug may be some sort of play on Kuribo, the Japanese name for Goombas. The file names within Sunshine often have a single letter suffix, meaning a letter is added to the end of a word. So the name Cug could simply be Ku, an abbreviation of Kuribo, and then a G. Anyone who's already seen an episode of Boundary Break will know that characters and objects in games are often placed out of bounds when they aren't in use. Since Cug is underground, it's possible the developers were doing tests with Cug and simply forgot to delete it after testing. It's also possible a developer left Cug here on purpose as an Easter egg for folks like She Says.
Thank you very much, guys, and now I'm going to show you a close-up of Delfino Island from far away. This is from the landing strip where Mario first starts his adventure. Now it's time to talk about Piantissimo. As you know, there's this Pianta here in Mario Sunshine that looks a little bit off. I'm sure a lot of you can't quite put your finger on it. He blends in incredibly well with the rest of the Piantas. Okay, I'm lying. But anyways, here's what he looks like without his mask on. Thanks to modelsresource.com, we were able to take the model of this character and simply remove the helmet from his head, giving you a very clear look at what he's supposed to look like in his human form. But actually, that's not the only thing the characters are hiding. Like, for example, the Nokis here are all shell-based creatures, and if you spray them with water, they hide inside their shells. Sometimes by moving the camera inside the shell, you can see the limbs shrunken down, the head, the arms, everything. But unlike other games, there's no consistency to this, because other times if you take the camera inside, all you'll see is just a couple of tries of geometry here, showing that all the limbs have been reduced to a size value that's not visible to the player. And these aren't the only characters that are hiding more than you can see. In Noki Bay, there's a level where you fight a giant eel, and the only extent you really have to engage with this eel is that you spray its eyes to get rid of some of the goop that's in it. But in truth, there's a lot more to this character model than you would normally see. First of all, taking the camera from this angle can show you that there's an entire outer body that's barely ever seen by the player, and then taking the camera inside the body itself will show that it has a gut. If you look up here, that's where the eyes are, and you're seeing the inside of the mouth. Looking down, you can see the uvula, which then gets you to the throat, and now we can go from the throat to the stomach. It's very clear that at a certain point, the developers wanted you to get inside this stomach, but I imagine it was probably just a little too traumatizing to put into a kid's game. And then of course, there's the Noki Bay Book, one of the greatest mysteries in out of bounds content. See, inside the Noki Bay bottle, there's this door that never opens. And if you take the camera inside the door, you can see the book. Now, nobody really has all the answers for this, but I'm gonna pass it over to Digino Gaming so they can talk about as much as we do know about this book.
It's true that no one really knows what the book's original purpose was, but we do at least know a few details. The door and book models are actually part of the level geometry and aren't categorized as objects or items. The book itself doesn't even have any collision programmed, which you can find out for yourself by using a glitch to clip by the door, or by hacking. It's speculated the book was once part of the mission, but the mission was changed to a red coin challenge during development. That said, there's no supplementary evidence for this. Fans have said the track that plays in the level is titled Book in the Bottle, implying the book was once an important part of the mission. However, the actual title for the song is Sky and Sea, in both the English and Japanese soundtracks.
Thanks guys, now let's talk about PD Piranha. As you know, this character attacks by vomiting brown sludge, and how that effect is pulled off in game is really interesting. Taking the camera just below the ground level will show you that the initial splurge of brown goo in fact clips through the floor, and then the model for that goo still exists for a little while after it's gone through the floor, and instead of continuously going downward, it stops and it shrivels up inside of itself. You can still see a tiny line of where the geometry still is, as it all gets sucked into each other. Now with that said, let's round off this scene with a zoom out of the boss area itself, showing you that the entire area is in a closed off prism, but outside of that black prism is a daytime sky dome. Alright, now on to a viewer request. As always, you can follow me here on Twitter if you ever want to give me a suggestion for an episode that I'm working on, or you can always just send me a message telling me what games you want me to cover. But anyways, people want to know, what does it look like when Mario's inside the pipes in Delfino Plaza? As a lot of you already know, when you go down into the pipes, the camera doesn't really follow Mario. It keeps you on the outside looking at a silhouette of Mario who's now running for the sewers. Well, if you take the camera all the way down, you'll see that the model for Mario still exists. And if you take the camera down low enough, you can see the entire model in fact. But the environment that he runs around in is just a flat piece of geometry. And without the special filters to make that outline really bold, it's really hard to see that original flat surface down here. And speaking of filters, the game loves these things. For example, there is a heat wave filter that is played in front of you at all times. Now, if we were to take the camera outside of Mario's view, truthfully, this is what you're supposed to see. A giant rectangle that represents how the heat wave effect is pulled off in the game. So while you're running around, Mario has a giant screen following him in front of his face at all times. It's kind of creepy when you think about it. And a similar effect is also used whenever there's a shadow cast over Delfino Island. There's also something very peculiar about this version of Super Mario Sunshine. As many of you know, in the Switch version of the game, the developers accidentally put back in dev cubes that had certain functions for some of the floodless areas. Well, similarly, if the game isn't running right, you can see a prism that surrounds Mario whenever he's supposed to have the outline effect when he's hidden behind environments. Now, I asked a lot of people if they knew exactly what this was. Nobody had a good answer, even the Super Mario Sunshine pros, who really get into the nit and gritty of this game. So if I had to guess, I'm willing to assume that this prism is what allows Mario to have this outline effect. But the prism itself is not supposed to be seen. That's supposed to remain invisible while it allows this effect to be cast over Mario. Now that's just armchair speculation. Please feel free to take it or leave it. But considering the fact that it follows Mario around and only follows Mario around when this effect is occurring, that is my best guess. I also want to take an opportunity to talk about the file select screen. What's really strange about this environment is that just over to the right, and because you can't manipulate the camera, you'll never see it. It's a unique dock that is never seen anywhere else in the game. Clearly, it was supposed to attach to the beach near Mario at a certain point, but they moved it away. For what reason? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it made the player think that they were supposed to be able to get over to the dock, and so it was frustrating testers or something. Again, there's no definitive answer here. And also, if we take the camera all the way out here, you can see how vast the environment is for the file select screen. Now, speaking of some really weird effects, we have this moment where Mario is going inside the Noki bottle, and he shrinks down to get inside. Well, doing this show long enough, I've realized that if any time there's a character that shrinks down or disappears or something like that, chances are there's something weird going on a technical level. So I took the time here to take a look at what Mario's doing in slow motion and from a different side to see how the model is affected. As it turns out, Mario turns into two Mr. Game & Watches. You can see a lot of his geometry gets flattened, but not all flattened to one side. It gets two sides, which is really funky. And for funny leftover stuff, we have Shadow Mario over here, who's waiting for Mario to trigger a cutscene. Now, you normally don't get close enough to see this, but if you pan the camera over to him while he's waiting for Mario, you can see that he's standing on top of a box. Now, after finding this for myself, I did some research, and I realized that someone else had found this prior, and they said that when you remove the box, it doesn't really affect how he stands on the spot. So technically, it's unnecessary for him to be standing on it, which leads me to believe that the only reason why this box is here is because at a certain point, the environment didn't either exist or it didn't function to allow things to stand on it. And so the box is there so that the character could stand there temporarily while the game was in development. And for, I guess, the reason of it just didn't need to be removed because the player would never see it, the box was, in fact, never removed. And speaking of unused things left behind, in the very first area of the game inside this building here, there's a couple of vases and pots. It's very weird. Some of these things don't look like they're textured correctly, honestly, because one of them is a wicker basket texture. But the most peculiar thing that I found was one that looked like a pianta, and I was like, yeah, that's kind of strange. I wonder what the texture sheet for this looks like. And taking a look for it yielded some really interesting results. For one thing, the pianta texture is straight up a pianta. It's not even square. It has the outline of a pianta, and the developers just decided to slap that on a vase. Over to the far left of that, though, is another pianta with a star shirt, and I don't think that's ever used anywhere in the game at all. But one thing I know for certain isn't used anywhere in the game is this texture for a gyroid from Animal Crossing. And I'm gonna pass this once again over to the guys at Digino Gaming to talk about this a little bit.
The gyroid in particular is interesting, as it may have been a sly reference included in honor of Animal Crossing's scriptwriter Makoto Wada. Wada came to the rescue during Sunshine's development and helped write the dialogue for Delfino's residents.
Alright, once again, thank you guys. And with that said, why don't we do a zoom out of the blooper course, which very surprisingly has that sky dome that has stars and train tracks. Guess I wasn't expecting that. Alright, now let's take a look inside of Mecha Bowser. Now, obviously, inside of Mecha Bowser is supposed to be Princess Peach and Bowser Jr., but they would never go for the trouble of having those two characters inside the Mecha Bowser if you never had a really good chance to see them anyway. That would be the logic behind it at least, but it looks like there was an intention for you to see them at least at one point, because if you take the camera inside the head, you can see the control panel that is usually only visible in the cutscene, and even in the cutscene, it's a higher polygon version of this control panel. So what you're looking at here is an unused low poly version of the control panel, which I believe is a completely undocumented discovery here. Alright, now it's time to start talking about some of these critters, like the seagulls here. The seagulls in Mario Sunshine have red around their eyes, making them a little bit angry looking, to be honest with you. Then we got the little green birds here. The green birds are really interesting looking. They have a tuft of red and yellow feathers on top of their heads, as well as a white dash for their eyes, and the eyes themselves are yellow. And even the legs for their feet, for some reason, have some level of detail to them. They have black and yellow stripes. And then we got the bees. The bees, you know, kind of surprised me, because usually with small insects, they go with cardboard cutouts. And if you're not familiar with the term, it's kind of like flat textures that move around in a 3D environment. But these guys went the extra mile for the bees. Pausing the game here and taking the camera right up to its face can show you that it has a Mario World kind of aesthetic with its own set of cartoon eyes. And it's fully 3D modeled. Anyways, with that out of the way, let's start talking about stuff that's hidden out of bounds again. Now, a lot of you recognize this enemy here. It's littered throughout the entire game. Well, there's two things to talk about here. One thing is that inside of all these goopy prisms hides the piranha plant inside, and this is what it looks like when scrunched up in there. But even more interesting is that if you take the camera just below its geometry, you can see that the very bottom is just primary colors that seem to swap in and out. It always matches the color of the goop that they're textured with. So in this case, we got some pinks, we got some oranges, and we got some yellows. And also that prism that I was talking about with the piranha plant. Well, taking the camera down below the surface can show you that it's fully modeled. It's a full encasement. It's almost in the shape of a human heart, I'd say. And here's a crappy segue. Speaking of things encased in other things, we have this bell tower in Delfino Plaza, and if you take the camera inside the tower, there's an unused flood box. And also, in many maps of Super Mario Sunshine, you can find a volcano off in the distance, but what's really strange is that there's a detail to this volcano in most areas that the player never gets a chance to see, and that is inside the crater of the volcano is this small little hole that comes to a point. Normally, it would make more sense to just leave that completely unmodeled, and heck, it would probably be even easier to just have a pool of lava or something. I mean, it's a fantasy game after all. But to go for the extra effort of making this small little detail seems to imply that it was supposed to be shown to the player at some point. And also, here's a fun little fact. Outside the boundaries of a lot of the environments in Super Mario Sunshine is extra layers of geometry, textured completely blue, so it's a little hard to see the depth of the geometry, but it's like a second crust to whatever you're supposed to be looking at in the game itself. And why this is all here, I can only imagine is because if the player clips the camera through the environment, the developers don't want you to see the sky dome or maybe just empty environment, and possibly thought that this blue aesthetic would be a little bit more appealing and not break the illusion quite as much as, say, the void. Then we got the star of the show, a toad that was meant to be seen by the player, but due to technical goofs, he was cut out of the US version of the game. Now you can see this toad in your brand new Nintendo Switch version on Super Mario 3D All-Stars. But since we're covering the GameCube original, I just wanted to give you a look at something that's totally bizarre. Now there are various scenes to Super Mario Sunshine, and in each scene, all the residents on the island are placed in different parts of the island, and they have different types of dialogue. Now for this one scene where Bowser Jr. shows up with his little submarine, there's supposed to be a yellow toad here, but you can't see him, and it's because he clips through the map and just kind of ends up chilling out below the environment, out of bounds. And so if we move the camera directly above us, we can see the exact coordinate in which this toad is being placed, forever screaming for help in the void.
Did you also know that scientists have found that games like Sunshine can inspire people to be more helpful towards others? For more Mario facts, check out the Did You Know Gaming video on Super Mario Sunshine.
And once again, thank you so much to Vessi for sponsoring this episode. You should definitely check out their Cityscape sneakers or their new weekend shoe, which by the way, is machine washable. Very comfortable, very breathable, very awesome. Like I said, head on over to vessi.com/shesays and then use the coupon code SheSays to get $25 off. Take care.
Thanks to Boundary Break for letting us come on, she says. I know, right? What a guy. What a guy. Absolute stellar fella. It's an honor, my friend. An honor. Thank you.